Welcome to today's webinar. This is Simone Turek. I am the Associate Policy Director at John Burton Advocates for Youth, and we're going to get started in just a few seconds. All right, welcome to today's web seminar. So again, this is Simone Turek. I'm the Associate Policy Director at John Burton Advocates for Youth. You'll see on the screen here, today we're going to talk about matriculation. Before we get into that content, we always go over a few tips with this technology, wonderful technology that brings us all web seminars. The information to participate is on the screen. You'll see a phone number to dial in. If you're listening through your speakers, we always recommend switching to your telephone if you start to have any trouble with the audio. Once this slide disappears, this information is also on your dashboard on the right-hand side of your screen. We are going to actually do things a little different today. We're going to do two Q&A sessions. So we're going to do one about midway through and then one at the end. So if you have questions during the presentation, make sure to submit them because we will get to them kind of sooner than usual this time. And then lastly, we always post our presentation materials for these webinars on the THP Plus site, but they're now going to also be posted on the California College Pathways website. And we also now have made sure to start posting all of John Burton Advocates for Youth webinars also on the John Burton Advocates for Youth website. So, I mean, we are covered. We have 3 websites that you can go to get these slides and the recording of the web seminar. And so now before we get started and before I introduce our panelists, I'm going to ask our Executive Director, Amy Lemley, she has an important policy update to give us all, so I'm going to just pass it over to her for a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Simone. Just wanted to take a moment before we kick off the web seminar to really ask for your support for Senate Bill 12. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to read about this legislation in our newsletter or through other avenues. We're very excited about it, and we really hope that we can partner with you to make it a success. In a nutshell, the legislation's goal is to increase the rate of the Pell Grant. Currently in California, just half of young people receive the Pell Grant. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, or really any detail from here, but really are hoping that you'll join us for a web seminar next Tuesday, Valentine's Day, where we're going to go into the legislation in a lot of detail. We will have survey findings of a survey of students who received the Pell, along with a survey of young people who did not receive the Pell, sharing their point of view on the difference that Pell receipt makes. We'll also have a survey from young people who participated in the K-FEAS program, which is Guardian Scholars-like program that's publicly funded at 26 community college campuses. So we're very excited about the potential for this legislation to really open the door of post-secondary education for current and former foster youth. And just to clarify, that definitely includes all of the different career and technical education training programs that are in place in our 113 community colleges. So again, the web seminar will be next Tuesday. We'll have a lot of additional information at that time, and so I'll hand it back over to Simone.
Thank you, Amy. Amy had to rush here for a previous meeting, so a little out of breath. She just made it just in the nick of time, so thank you so much, Amy, for doing that. And our upcoming web seminars are here on this screen. The one that Amy referenced on SB 12 is our next web seminar on the 14th on Valentine's Day. So if you're looking for something really exciting to do on Valentine's Day, join us for this web seminar from 10 to 12 or 10 to 11. These are all from 10 to 11. It doesn't, I realize, say the time, but that's pretty much when our web seminars happen, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then I won't go into detail about these other web seminars, but we have a lot going on in the months of February and March, and the next post-secondary education training series webinar is actually is in March on the 9th. As you can see, all of these web seminars are posted, all of these upcoming, on the John Burton Advocates for Youth website. And if you want to receive our weekly newsletter, which lists when we have upcoming web seminars and a larger kind of description of them, you can sign up for our mailing list there. So, excuse me. So, this is our 4th web seminar in a series of 7 focused on post-secondary education. And these webinars, they're monthly. They're held the 2nd Thursday of the month, again from 10 to 11. And if you're registered for today's webinar, you're registered for all of these, and they run through the month of May, so no need to re-register for those. But the other webinars, the SB12 webinar and the other ones on the screen, those have separate registrations, so you will want to visit our website if you want to get on those as well. So as I mentioned, today's web seminar will focus on the matriculation process that's required of students. And we have some really great presenters to kind of really break down this process for you and help us understand how to best assist youth through it. But before I introduce today's presenters, or before we introduce all the presenters, I want to introduce, we have a staff who is new to John Burton Advocates for Youth, Jessica Petras, and she's actually located in Los Angeles. And she's going to kind of present and moderate a portion of today's web seminar. So thanks, Jessica, for joining us, and I will let you then introduce our other 2 wonderful presenters.
Thank you so much, Simone. So we're very excited. We have 2 excellent guest speakers with us today. We have Ken Sori, the Executive Vice President with Educational Results Partnership, who's going to really walk us through the assessment process, provide information about some of the best practices out there, and give tangible steps and advice for our foster youth on how they can best navigate this process and successfully go through it. And then after Ken speaks, we have Dr. Katie Hearn, who is both an English professor at a local college and also the co-founder of the California Acceleration Project. And she'll be speaking to us today about the remediation process, bringing to light some of the best practices that are out there, and also providing advice for our foster youth on how to navigate this process if they do have to take remedial courses, with the ultimate goal of reducing the time that foster youth have to spend in remedial courses. So to start off, I'm going to be speaking about the matriculation process, particularly into community colleges. For many students, this can be a very difficult and confusing process, particularly for first-time students, and particularly for foster youth who may lack the support to navigate this process. So as I give you an overview about how a student will enroll into the community college system, I'm also going to spend some special attention on priority registration, so we make sure that foster youth are aware of this benefit and can receive this benefit. Next slide. So what is priority registration and who is eligible? Basically, priority registration allows the student to register early so they can ideally get into the courses they need before they fill up. I think sometimes foster youth might have a misconception that this means that they can get into a class after it's already full. That's not the case. It just simply means that they can register a little bit earlier than their peers. We're very excited that the eligibility requirement for priority registration has recently been expanded for community colleges and CSUs with SB 906. And so this just went into effect this year as of January 1st. And previously, foster youth would be eligible for priority registration if they had been in foster care on or after their 18th birthday and if they were under the age of 24. So that now expanded to include more foster youth for those who are in foster care on or after their 16th birthday and are under the age of 26. I think it's important to note, though, that since this just recently went into effect as of January 1st, not all foster youth students may be aware of this expanded eligibility requirement, and even some of the staff at some of the schools may not be aware as well. So if a foster youth is going to their campus, they might have to advocate for themselves as well. Next slide. The good news is there's also other groups that are eligible for priority registration as well. So you might be working with a foster youth, maybe they don't fit into that criteria for priority registration, but they might fit into one of these other eligible groups. So also with the passage of SB 906 this year, homeless youth have also been identified as another eligible group. And this is great news, and it will be in effect until January 1st of 2020. This is considered that homeless youth as someone that's a student under the age of 25, and they've been verified at any time during the 24 months immediately preceding their application for admission that they're homeless. And for this, they use the federal definition through the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And there's a few ways that a student can be verified as homeless, maybe through a homeless provider or through a financial aid faculty at the college. Again, it's important to note that the addition of homeless youth is new, so not all the colleges may have a system in place yet, to be aware of that as well. Other groups that are also eligible that maybe students you're working with might fall into are students who are participants in the extended opportunity programs and services, which many foster youth are. And this is for students who are disadvantaged by social, economic, and/or educational circumstances. This could also include students who are in the disabled students programs and services, students in CalWorks, which is for low-income families, or students who are active duty military and recent veterans. Next slide, please. So there's actually 3 steps that a foster youth would have to complete to qualify for priority registration at California community colleges. Those steps are they have to participate in an orientation, they have to complete the assessment process, and 3, they have to develop an education plan. Now, it's important to note with the orientation process, that can vary school by school in terms of what that looks like and when it's offered. There's some schools that require an in-person orientation. There are some schools that do online orientation. Some schools also offer summer bridge programs, which if a school does provide that, I highly recommend it for students. It gives them a really in-depth overview about what to expect in college, how to be successful in college. Sometimes they even help students prepare for the assessment process so they can more successfully proceed through that. So it's also good to see if there's a summer bridge program. And in addition to the orientation process, looking a little different at each campus, these dates can vary school by school as well. Now, in terms of step number 2, which is to complete the assessment process, I'm not going to go in depth into this here. As I mentioned, Katie and Ken are really going to give you all the information you need to know about navigating the assessment process. I do think, though, it is important to notice that the assessment process as well varies school by school. So when you're working with a youth, you want to help them be able to research what that process looks like at their college, and also the available support for the assessment process can vary school by school as well. Some might provide workshops, some might simply provide a booklet for them to do a practice test if there's an assessment test. So it's good for them to look into those options, also see what other nearby colleges might be offering too. If that's an option, sometimes they can, for example, go to a nearby school that has a great workshop if they want to participate. And lastly, the 3rd step is they need to develop an education plan. Now, of course, they can meet with a general counselor for this education plan, but whenever possible, if you do have a student that's in the EOP&S program, we highly recommend that they meet with that EOP&S counselor to create this education plan. This counselor will most likely be able to spend more time with the student, provide more support, and be more attuned to their needs as they're helping them through this. So once they complete these 3 steps, they're eligible for priority registration. And you'll see on here I have a website, stepforward.ccco.edu. That gives an overview of the steps that have to be completed for priority registration. Just another good tool and website to keep in mind as well. Next slide. So when is priority registration? Again, as with the other steps as well, this can vary school by school. For some schools, you'll see that priority registration is simply a week before. There's other schools that it's a month before. And some schools have firm deadlines around this. They might say, well, you missed the priority registration date, so you need to wait for the regular date. Other schools might be a little more flexible with this and say, oh, it's okay if you miss the date, you can still register if it's before the regular registration date. So, I think in general, as you're helping a student navigate this process, the biggest tip I can say is start the process early. There's a lot of steps along the way, and you want to make sure that the youth has all the time they need to go through these steps, complete them successfully, and have time to research and be aware of all the different deadlines as well. I think it can be difficult to find some of this information online. I know for myself, I was looking at priority registration dates on some of the campus websites, and I couldn't find it. So you might want to recommend to the youth too, because I know they often prefer to find this information on a website, but they may need to, in fact, call and go in person. In addition, I think it's really helpful to get that youth connected to someone on campus that works with foster youth as soon as possible and at the beginning of the process, so they get all the support that they might need as they navigate through college. That might be through the Foster Youth Success Initiative, a foster youth liaison. Those are at every community college campus. They might be housed in different departments at that campus, sometimes in the financial aid office, but this could be a person that can be supportive to the foster youth as well. Many campuses also have foster youth campus support programs, things like Guardian Scholars or Renaissance Scholars, and different schools have different names for these programs. But it's good to research and see what's available at their college and get them connected to a person in one of these programs. If you're not sure who that person is or what services are available at that college, you can always go to our website at cacollegepathways.org. And if you click on the tab that says Find Campus Support Programs, it's all listed there. They can look up their college, look up the list of the foster youth liaisons, or look up the list of campuses that receive the KFES program, which, as Amy had mentioned earlier, is at 26 community college campuses throughout the state. So that kind of is a brief overview about the matriculation process and the steps along the way. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ken, who, you can go to the next slide, who will be talking to you about the assessment process and also highlighting the multiple measures of placement. Ken?
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes, we can.
Well, we're good. Good. All right, great. So before I talk about this slide, I just want to mention a couple things from what Jessica talked about. We sort of showed you the matriculation process once a student hits the campus, but there is a critical step just in the application itself. And want to make sure that everyone is aware that can be a bit of a daunting application. It's a universal application. You select which college you're interested in, but it's the same for applying to any college. But that is a process that probably needs a little hand-holding, particularly with foster youth. So just keep that in mind. And that process starts pretty early. Many colleges are already starting the process of assessing students and starting to get them into the pipeline for registration as early as now for the fall semester. So just know that isn't something that, one of the mistakes I think students make is that they wait till a month before they think they want to go in August, and you kind of miss some of the early deadlines that way. And we really do lose a lot of students between actually putting an application in and then actually starting to get to a college and doing the ed planning and registration. So that it's that summer melt kind of process that we need to make sure that we're watching out for students and making sure that they stick with the process. What I want to talk about is just in the work that we do, we're going to talk a little bit about how students are assessed and placed into courses and the kind of work that we're doing now to inform that process to be much more accurate and fair for students. But when we think about the different places where students, if the idea is to get them to and through college and into a living wage job, there's a lot of sort of transitional points that we, as a system of education, don't do a very good job. And we don't do handoffs well, in other words. So as students, go from middle school to high school, we miss some opportunities there. And a lot of students sort of start and repeat things that they've already done. It's particularly acute from high school to college. And so at the community colleges, because they're open enrollment, the student background or their GPA, the courses that they took, don't really follow them to a community college like it would at a university. And so given that, we tend to use a pretty blunt instrument to try to get a handle on what students know and are able to do in order to get them into the appropriate classes. Meanwhile, there's a lot of really good work once students are placed more effectively that Katie will talk about in terms of trying to really help students get through, if they are assigned to developmental education, to get through those courses much faster and more successfully so that they can ultimately take those transfer level courses in English and math and be on their way towards a degree or certificate or transfer. So the idea here is that if we can really tighten up those transitional points, we can really change the equation from what the current state is, or at least current thinking based upon current practices, is somewhere between about 2 to 3 out of 10 students we're deeming ready to do college level work. And in our research, which I'll show you in a minute, kind of debunks that. But if we can really sort of change the equation and get it to more like 5 out of 10, that's a whole different conversation that happens between the K-12 universe, the high schools, and the colleges. And services and supports can be much more targeted to students that really need them. So let's go to the next slide. So how are we doing that? What's happening right now in the community colleges is that, first of all, colleges, we have 113 community colleges in California, and they all do something different around testing and assessment of students for placement. They have what we call local control, so they all have their own ability to decide how to do that effectively. But what we're finding, because it's practices are sort of all over the map and are relying heavily on primarily just an assessment test at one time on one day, we're placing currently about 85% of students in California into developmental education in English or math, and that's a pretty high number. What happens is that each time a student is placed 1 level below, or 2 levels below, or 3 levels below, each one of those levels, their likelihood of completing a transfer level course drops to by about a third or a half every additional layer. So it's not just that students are in what we are deeming as developmental or remedial education, is that they're being placed way down in the sequence where they have to take multiple courses to get through. And what we're finding in that is about 50 to 60% of the equity gaps, in other words, what we refer to in K-12 as the achievement gap, can be explained in that process during assessment and matriculation. So we're already creating a disproportionate impact on students who we care most about getting through right from the very beginning. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, looks like my slide got a little convoluted here. So nationally, there's been a lot of research, and we've done a lot of work here with partners in California to look at what does the tests that are in current use tell us about whether students will be successful in college. And what we're finding both in California and across the country is that the reality is that the placement tests that we use, such as AccuPlacer or Compass, you'll hear about those tests, is that they really have very little relationship with how students will do in a college level course. In other words, predicting whether they would get a C or better at a particular level of a course. That's troubling because it's an efficient way to test students, but it's a way that we're finding increasingly pretty severely underplace a large number of students into the developmental sequence who otherwise would be successful at a college level or transfer level course. And there's incredible variability across colleges, particularly in California, around where they set the cut score. In other words, where students make it to a transfer level course or not. What we're finding is that our community colleges, believe it or not, are actually setting a higher cut score than the CSUs or UC systems for placement. And it's just happened over time. We've trying to, it's a battle between trying to make sure that the students are prepared, and we want to keep high standards. And we've over time been ratcheting up these cut scores to a point where they're really underplacing students. And particularly this affects students of color, low-income students, foster youth, first-generation students, even more so than their counterparts in the colleges. One thing I will mention, and we're not going to talk a lot about today, but in California there is an effort to really improve the assessment tools that we use, and you'll start to hear more about a common assessment that colleges are going to be increasingly using. We have hope that that'll give us better information, but we know that even if the test is better, that we need more information about student capacity to be able to really tell what they can and can't do and where they should be placed. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that we've been able to do in all this work and research and putting together data on how foster youth students are doing is start to really highlight key momentum point as students go to college. And so this is an example of a dashboard that we've built for the California community colleges that looks at how foster youth are doing in our system to where they're placed in courses. Are they maintaining a significant or a high enough GPA? Are they getting awards and degrees? And so it's a really rich tool for those that are advocating for foster youth on college campuses. This is just an example of one where you can see that as we compare foster youth to non-foster youth in those squares that are in a pink color, is that with the students who attempt a math course at the community colleges, now keep in mind that about 30% of the students, after they get their placement scores, never actually attempt an English or math course. So there's a large number of students who we don't even pick up in these data because we don't know what happened to them. But of those that attempted a math course in the community colleges, about 88% of them are starting in a developmental course or what we call remediation, compared to about 78% of non-foster youth. And in English or English as a second language courses, about 73% are going into those the developmental courses compared to about 62%. The most striking thing is that the students who do start out in a developmental course, what we're finding is about 12 to maybe as high as 20% at most are actually making it through the sequence. So in other words, they're actually getting to that transfer level course, which they'll need to get a degree or to transfer. After 2 years, only about 12% of them are actually completing. So what that's telling us, and from all the research that we've done, is that as much as well-meaning as those developmental courses are, they're really not delivering on what we would hope they would do at a level that they're designed to do, which is getting students through and being able to complete those courses. So we need to do a better job about placing them in the first place. Let's go to the next slide. So what we've been able to do now, because we have a huge data set that's able to match high school transcripts with community college data. This is really the first time this has ever been able to be done at scale. We are able to then look at what are the background or the academic factors in high school that might better predict how students would do in college courses, irrespective of the test. And so we look at things like high school GPA, the last math course they took, what grade they got, and this data is something that the colleges are increasingly looking at because they know that the more information you have about students, the better. And many colleges in California, we have about 65 now, that are looking at these high school transcripts to figure out, do they add more information and are more accurately helping us place students as opposed to relying on a single test. So what we're finding is that this really significantly reduces the underplacement of students and getting more students into the college level courses. And by doing so, on average, it saves students about a year of time in the community colleges, which is hugely valuable, particularly to a foster youth who are already sort of fragile in the college experience. And if we can give them back that time, we not only save them time and money in college, but we're also giving them back a year of time when they enter the workplace, which is critical. And I think from a college perspective, placing students more effectively and getting more students into these transfer level courses increases their likelihood exponentially of completing a degree, a certificate, or transferring to a university. Let's go to the next slide. So these are the factors that we looked at. All of these different aspects of a high school transcript have some value in informing placement. In other words, they correlated with whether a student is likely to get a C or better in a course, particularly at a transfer level course, but also at each level of the developmental sequence. So things like cumulative high school GPA is really the biggest one that adds most of the information. And it's not surprising because if you think about it, if a student is a good student in high school, they've got good grades over the course of 3 or 4 years, they've across numerous subjects, numerous faculty, having a decent GPA means that you showed up on time, you did your work. It's not rocket science to think that, hey, that might be a good indication of whether a student's going to do well in college. And but there's also things, particularly in mathematics, to look at in terms of what level of math course they took as their last course, how they did in that course, and looking at things that they're not in a remedial sequence in the high schools as well does add some value to it. But in general, these are the pieces of information that we look at that we found correlate and more strongly correlate with how students will do in college courses than taking the placement test. So let's go to the next slide. Here's the exciting part. So when we've been able to apply these models and have the data follow the students, we work with the colleges to be able to use sort of a back office algorithm, so to speak, but a way that they can take this information and apply it to students to give them a placement recommendation that how we typically deploy it is we say, look at how they did on the test. If they got into a transfer level course, let them in. Let's look at their high school transcript data side by side, and if that set shows that it's a higher placement via their high school transcripts, use that placement. We call it disjunctive, but it just means that you're basically taking the higher of the two. They got in by the test grade. If they got in by their high school transcript grade, give them the higher placement. And when we do that, I want to note that this is actually fairly conservative. How we anchor our predictions and the models is around giving students a 70% chance of getting a C or better in the course in which they're placed. And frankly, that's a bit higher than most colleges are getting currently in terms of their success rate. But we started out with a fairly conservative approach so that we could really get more colleges to adopt this. But there are colleges that are looking at the idea that if we make this a little more less conservative and maybe allow for some lower success rate, it can significantly increase the number of students who actually get through the sequence, and that may be a trade-off that colleges are really willing to do. But for the most part, we can show that the current state, if you're just using the process that colleges are using, about 38% of students are placing into transfer level English. But I do want to remind you that that only represents students who took an English course, and again, there's about 30% that don't. So that number is a little bit high, even a little bit rosy for the state. But by changing and using high school transcripts, we're able to increase that upwards of about 30 percentage points up to about 61%. We have colleges that are even getting higher than that. So now you're talking about 6 out of 10 students that are ready for college, as opposed to historically what we say is about 2 out of 10. And that's a whole different ballgame and changes the trajectory. In math, we're going from about 31% to 42%, and that is a little lower primarily because we do factor in, or our models factor in, the level of math that students take. But again, that's pretty conservative, and we think we could get that even higher if we work with colleges to be more flexible on how they set the criteria. One thing I will emphasize on this chart, we're terribly excited about this for one particular reason. If you represent this across the colleges in California, all 113 colleges, each one of those percentage point increase is about 4,000 students. So that's a huge number of students. If you put it in perspective for English, if you took those students who now are allowed into transfer level courses that otherwise wouldn't have, it's the equivalent of filling Dodger Stadium every year with students. And that just could have huge impacts for how our students do in our colleges. So let's go to the next slide. I just want to give you a little bit of some of the colleges who have been doing this already, just to show you what's happening. One of the biggest concerns that faculty have when we talk about this work is that, well, aren't you really just flooding my classes with students who are underprepared and our success rate's going to go down? And what we're finding is that's just not the case. So you can see this is an example from Las Positas College in the Bay Area in English, and you can see that in 2015 they were placing about 35% of their students into transfer level English. And by using multiple measures of placement, they increased that to 78%. That's a huge jump, and many, many more students who are going to be much more likely to get through and complete a degree and reach their goals. And what they found is that when you break it out, the far 2 bars, compared to previous years, and even if you clump everybody together, the multiple measure students are doing as well, if not better, than the students who were placed via the tests or in previous placements. So that's exciting news because we doubled the number of students and they did just as well, if not better, than the students who were traditionally placed there. Let's go to the next slide. So the other thing that happens in this process is that it has huge equity implications. You remember I said that our placement practices in their current form really affect students of color, low-income students, foster youth, more dramatically than their counterparts. And what we're finding is that by looking at the high school transcripts and giving students credit for stuff that they've already been successful in, we can dramatically increase the numbers for every population to a point where students that are Latino or African American are now performing at about the same level as students historically have performed, where in the past they've been quite a bit lower. So this is exciting news because while everybody's going up, we haven't closed the equity gap. We've really impacted the students that are most fragile in this process to a level where we've been really underplacing those students over time and having baking in equity problems from the beginning. So let's go to the next slide. This is another college, MiraCosta, and you can see that their success rates, they show you pre-reform and post-reform. That just simply means that they applied multiple measures. That's the blue bar compared to the red bar. And then these two sets of bars represent the spring semester 2016 and then the fall semester. So they've had 2 semesters of doing this. I think the most exciting thing, if you look on the right, is that the purple bar represents the students who were placed using high school transcripts, and they're far outperforming the students by 10 percentage points who were placed via the test, which is just really great for the students who get a better shot in this process. Let's go to the next slide. Kenyatta College is another college in the Bay Area. They started with a fairly small pilot, but they're now expanding it pretty dramatically. And again, you can see that their model pretty much mirrored what we predicted with our statewide model, where they did increase the number of students placed into math by 53 students. So nothing to sneeze at. And then in English, they doubled the number of students that were placed into transfer level English, with really no change in success rates. The students who were placed via high school transcripts, slightly higher in math and a little bit lower in English, but not huge jumps where with way more students getting in there, that's a really exciting thing to see at 75% success rate. Next. So that's just a sort of an example of colleges that are doing this, that are really having some success. And again, I mentioned that there's about 65 colleges that about half of those are already doing this, and half of them are planning to do it by the fall. But not all colleges have made this change. And so most are still primarily using the test, even though by law they're required to use some form of multiple measure. So it's really important for our FOSTA students to understand that you're probably in this process still going to have to take the test, regardless of how innovative your college is around placement. And so these tests are really they're really high stakes, and they really set the tone for whether or not you're likely to be successful on how you do on them. So it is important to encourage FOSTA to take the test seriously, to know that it's coming, to prepare, to get a good night's sleep, all of those things that are really critical, and that they know that, to not put too much pressure on them, but to know that it's important, that they take it seriously. It's also important to look, really research to see whether there are some pre-screening or test prep options at the colleges that they're interested in. And there are all plenty of other resources as well that you can explore in terms of college websites often have sample tests. You can look at things like Khan Academy. It was mentioned before about the idea of summer bridge programs are really excellent, and even some colleges have, if they're still relying primarily on the test, they still have opportunities for things like boot camps where students can take the test and then take sort of a crash course to bring up their skills and retake the test as well. So those are all things to really look for, to see what kind of opportunities are there, and encourage our students to take advantage of them. So let's go to the next slide.
I think we're actually at Q&A. Oh, you know what? I think, Ken, we are going to, I want to jump to Q&A. We've gotten a few questions. They're generally asking the same thing, which just tells me there's one very important question for you. So I'm going to ask it, and I think I'm looking here. It might be partially described on your slide. So I'm going to ask it now, and you can maybe kind of address it in combination with this slide. So you said 65% are now using both GPA and assessment tests. How do we find out which colleges are doing this? And if they're not, can the youth advocate for themselves to consider the GPA when determining which English or math class they have to take? So questions are all kind of asking about how do we know which are the colleges that are doing these great things that you're talking about that make it more likely for them to reach their educational goals?
Yeah, there isn't sort of a published list at this point. I think what the best thing is to figure out which local colleges the student might be interested in, and then explore on their websites as to what they're doing in terms of the assessment process. You could probably talk to the counselors at the college to find out if that's something that they're using. I would recommend, though, too, that colleges all do this a little differently, and some of them adopt our model right off the bat. Others sort of tweak it and change it a little bit locally. Some of them kind of do it by hand with a counselor. So one of the things that I would really recommend to be proactive, where the students really aren't going to be able to advocate if this college isn't using multiple measures right now. They're not going to have a lot of agency to be able to advocate for a college to do it. It's really a college-wide decision that takes a long process. However, at least arming them with their transcripts and having that in a folder that they can go to meet with a counselor. Oftentimes those things are still considered, and it's just good to arm them with as much information as possible about what kind of student they were, what the GPA was. So I would highly recommend that to try to make sure that you pre-arm them with as much information as possible about their high school background, because it may be taken into consideration either formally or informally at a college.
Okay, thanks, Ken. So I think I think if you want to just finish this slide, I thought that we were at Q&A, but I'm looking. It looks like the slide has to do, I guess, not really so much with the question you answered, but more just about that many schools are considering high school transcripts. So if you want to finish that up, and then we can move on. We'll move on to our next section.
Yeah, I think I covered this slide pretty well already, so I think we're good for questions.
All right, great. So we took that question that covered actually several that were submitted. Everyone wanted to know, that was their burning question, is which are the schools that are doing this. And so we're going to move on to, I'm going to pass it to Jessica, who's going to introduce our next speaker, and then we're going to do another Q&A at the end. So keep submitting your questions.
Great. So now we have Dr. Katie Hearn, who's going to take a deeper look into the remediation process and ways that we can improve completion and equity among foster youth. So Katie, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Can we move on to the next slide? So this is going to underscore a lot of the points that Ken made. This is what you're looking at here is the statewide student success scorecard, which takes a 6-year look into how many students go on to complete a degree, certificate, or transfer outcome in 6 years. And you can see that if a student comes in and is classified college prepared, 70% of them will complete within 6 years. But if they come in and are classified unprepared for college and required to take these remedial or developmental courses in English, math, ESL, reading, their completion drops to 41%. So this is a really critical point in the student's educational journey of what happens to them at that initial placement plays a huge role in their long-term outcomes in college. And sadly, more than 3/4 of incoming students are put into that unprepared group. The figure that Ken gave is 85%. And that's very high nationally, and what that really indicates is that colleges are putting a lot of students into remedial courses that they shouldn't be putting in, that don't need those remedial courses. There's a lot of research pointing in that direction, including some of what Ken shared. So if we could move on to the next slide. Traditionally, this is just to summarize, when colleges are worried that students are underprepared, our approach has been historically to make them take between 1 and 4 semesters of remedial courses, and more if they start in ESL. And it can be in up to 4 subjects. And most of these courses don't earn degree or transfer credit. And I think that a lot of students don't necessarily understand this when they come in and get their placement results. They just are put into a course and they're at a college, and so they assume that that's a college course. And they don't recognize that these courses are just sort of, not going to count toward anything, not going to count toward an associate's degree, not going to count toward a transfer. So that's something to just help them be aware of when you're working with them. Next slide. So I think we built this, from as a faculty member, I'll say, when we built this system over the last 20, 30 years, we had good intentions. We wanted them to be these courses to help students be more successful in college. But what we've learned from the research of the last decade or so is that every single remedial course that we put in a student's path and require them to take lowers their likelihood of completing college. And that's very established, and Ken talked about that. So it's really, even though these are intended to help students, the consequences, it makes them less likely to complete college. Next slide. And you can just see a glimpse of it here. So this is Kenyatta College, which if any of your students are in San Diego, send them to Kenyatta College because they've completely transformed this and have accelerated options in math, English, and ESL. But you can see in fall 2010, this is a statewide data tool we have. In fall 2010, in a 3-year window, you can see what happened to students who started 3 levels below a transferable course in math. So you can see that 175 students started in that course 3 levels below, which was the pre-algebra course. And then over a 3-year period, 10 of them went on to complete a transferable college-level math course. Just devastating attrition in that sequence. It puts a sort of it makes concrete what we're talking about the high attrition rates of students who are in remedial courses and the low completion rates. Next slide. And you can see here's a statewide snapshot on that. Students who start 1 level below in English writing, just 48% of them will complete college English within 3 years. If they're required to take 2 remedial courses in English, it drops to 34%, and if they're required to take 3 or more remedial courses in English, it drops to 19%. And from an equity standpoint, students of color are 2 to 3 times more likely to be placed into that lowest level where they have the worst outcomes. So this is a huge driver of the equity gaps we see in college completion, is we're disproportionately placing students of color into multiple remedial courses that they don't get out of. Next slide. And it's even worse in math. So if a student is required to take 3 or more remedial courses in math, only 6% of them will complete a transferable course within 3 years. And across California, more than half of Black and Hispanic students are placed there. So this adds the urgency around colleges really rethinking what we're doing with our incoming students and what we require them to do if we think they're not prepared for college level work. Next slide. So just to sort of high level summarize the research, that students are much more likely to complete college level transferable courses in English and math if they begin directly in those transferable courses. If they don't have even a single layer of remedial courses in front of them, they're much more likely to complete across the state and nationally. And there's sort of 2 ways you can begin in a transferable college level course. You can just take the regular one. You can qualify for just a regular 3-unit or 4-unit college English or college statistics or college algebra. Or a growing trend at some colleges is to offer transfer level courses that have extra co-requisite support. So instead of taking a 3-unit college English, you're taking a 5-unit college English class with the same instructor that just provides more time and more support and guidance to help the students reach the outcomes. Those are really powerful models for students that really increase completion. And there's about 20 colleges in the state that are either offering those or in the process of developing them for next year. So try to, and I don't have a list for you that's a really good list where I could say these colleges are not, but it's a growing trend in the state, and over the next couple of years we'll see more of these. If those are not available to your students, then the next best option would be to begin in an accelerated course that's 1 level below transferable English and math. Those courses typically are integrated reading and writing courses, so your student could just take 1 remedial course instead of 2 separate courses in reading and writing. There are also, at about 35 colleges in the state, pre-statistics courses for students who aren't going to pursuing math-intensive fields, so they're not going into business or a science, technology, engineering, math field. So that's that would be a good alternative to sort of just repeating that traditional algebra content that they already went through in their K-12. Next slide. So here's the bottom line advice for students is that they should avoid taking multiple remedial classes if at all possible. And so I think because there isn't a good central resource that just sort of lays out which colleges are doing multiple measures and which colleges have co-requisite options or accelerated options, I would say they just need to work with the designated foster youth coordinator to investigate these options for alternative placement and alternative remediation. So some of these can went over how can they prepare for the test, can they be placed based on transcript information. One thing Ken didn't mention is every college has a prerequisite challenge process we're required to by law. At my college, they could submit like 3 samples of writing, and it'll be reviewed by English teachers. And that's another way to start at a higher level of English and math sequences, so investigating those options. Next slide. Okay, and then also working with the foster youth coordinator to determine if there are accelerated options for remediation. So again, integrated reading writing courses instead of separate courses, options for completing remediation in 1 semester instead of 2 or more, pre-statistics courses, and especially these co-requisite models where students can begin directly in a transferable course with some extra support. Okay, next slide. And this is really important when you're working with students, is that the word accelerate tends to scare students, and especially in math, students often come in with very little confidence about their skills, and an impulse that they tend to have is to say, I need to start at the beginning. Oh, I'm not very good at math, I'm not very good at English, I need to start at the beginning. And sometimes counselors will reinforce that with them, and they'll say, oh, you need to start at the beginning. And because neither the student nor the counselor is aware of what that will do to their long-term chances of completing college. And so even though it's a completely understandable impulse for the counselor and the student to think, let's put them in a lower class and help them have some success, and it is a terrible choice for students to choose to take multiple remedial classes or even 1 remedial class if they can in any way get out of it. So just in terms of working with your students, remember that every remedial course they're going to take reduces their likelihood of earning a degree or transferring. So even if they're afraid about their skills, that's the consequence of a choice to place themselves down. And even if they don't think they're good at math or English, they'll be much better off if they can start in a transfer level class or at best a 1 level below accelerated class. And if they're nervous, then they should seek out extra support and build in extra tutoring appointments into their schedule and approach it that way rather than saying, I'm going to take a whole class that puts me further behind in college. And then just to underscore this point that the things that Ken and I are talking about with you today are not necessarily the widespread in terms of counselors' awareness or faculty awareness across the 113 community colleges. So that really means that you need to help students advocate for themselves, and find foster youth and try to navigate these systems because they're likely to encounter people who say, oh, you're not ready for that, you'd be better off in this lower class, and not realize that makes them less likely to succeed. So advocacy is really critical while the system is still hasn't fully implemented these changes yet. Next slide.
Thanks, Katie. This was really great information. I want to move quickly to questions. First question is kind of just really bringing this to a ground level. So you guys talked a lot about, advocating for foster youth, advocating for themselves, and also those that work with foster youth kind of helping them do so. kind of, can you operationalize this for us? You know, a student is placed in remedial courses. What do they do? Where do they go, and what do they say? Kind of, can you just give us maybe a kind of an example of if you were working with it to give a student advice?
I think it's going to vary on each campus, which is why it's hard to do that. So my best advice is the ones I gave in the slide of who find their foster youth point person or get themselves linked up with a counselor, and then bring all these options to the table, you know, sort of that they come in with the information and to say, you know, I really want to start higher in the sequence. I understand that that will make me much more likely to complete college. What are my options? Can I retake the test? Can I do a prerequisite challenge? Can you look at my transcript and authorize me as a waiver and authorize me to move up in the sequence? I think it's going to be, they're going to need to try to find a local person, a local counselor that they can, who understands what options are available on campus and can help them navigate them.
Okay, so I'm hearing you say kind of coming armed with information, so kind of what was on your slides, like bringing those in as options, finding that counselor or that kind of foster youth champion on campus and saying, are these things available or what is available? Okay.
Yep.
And then we have a few questions about kind of some of the details here. How does the data disaggregate students who are working to complete an AA versus an AAT? And I'm guessing that's an AA transfer?
Yeah. Well, I don't think I haven't seen data on AA versus AAT. I haven't seen anything broken down that way, but I can say that in the accelerated models that I've shared, there's been a lot of analysis of how different groups do. So groups who have learning disabilities, groups that have lower GPAs coming in, groups of different ethnic groups, socioeconomic groups, and every single group does better in these options. So I think it's just it's a function of when we shorten the structure that they have to get through, especially for a group that like foster youth that have so many forces that are pulling them away from school with poverty and uncertain housing and all of that, that we can't stretch out their educational process any more than it already is. It already takes a very long time to earn a degree. So adding semesters of courses that don't count toward anything is bad for every single group that has been looked at.
Okay, thanks. This question is, can students elect to have an adult advocate with them to ask some of these questions? Or because they are adults, is there an expectation that they hold one-on-one discussions with college counselors?
I think the normal thing is to have one-on-one discussions, but and you know, teachers and counselors would say when somebody's 18, you know, there's the federal privacy regulations that we have to be really careful about, but the student themselves can waive those. So if they say, I want this adult in a room with me, they have every right to do that.
Great. Okay, so one of the slides showed that students who had to take remedial courses tend to be older than students who do not need to take remedial courses. Is the multiple measures assessment appropriate for these students whose high school grades are from several years back?
Ken, you want to take that?
So the question is whether if they start later after they take some time off, whether they're still able to access these?
Well, it's whether the multiple measures assessment, whether it's appropriate for students who graduated from high school some years back.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, what we're finding is that the predicted utility of high school GPA and courses outperforms the test out to about anywhere from 7 to 10 years. And so it still has more value to place students than just using one placement test out many, many years. In fact, we even found a little bit of a bump in mathematics where a 6-year delay or more actually helps students be more successful in a way. It's sort of a way to explain the data. But and it just might be that students are coming back that are more serious about going to school, et cetera. So that it's not really about, you lose all the content. We're really trying to predict what student capacity is for them to be successful. and it doesn't necessarily mean that they forget everything in 2 years. So it's absolutely appropriate out many, many years.
Okay, thanks. And then our last question is, are there any opportunities online or other opportunities for students to get placements or take courses at institutions with less severe placement policies and then transfer that credit or that placement to their local institution?
Oh, it's such a good question. I am not sure about that. I think that Mount San Jacinto College has an accelerated English course that I believe they are offering online, but I'm not sure if it's 100% online. I'm not aware of courses of colleges that are doing accelerated options 100% online, although I wish I were, so that would be an option for people who are stuck at a place that's not doing it.
And what about, and I think it was kind of a two-part question, is are there any opportunities online, or is there any opportunities for students to take courses at like a different institution that has less severe placement policies?
Oh, yes, definitely. So I have sometimes I have a student that's kind of trapped at my own college's policies are a little more restrictive, and I'll say, can you get to Berkeley City College and get in their pre-stats class? Or Cuyamaca College has, Cuyamaca College in math has 100% of students can qualify directly for college level statistics with extra support. And if you want to be in a business or STEM field, the lowest placement you could have is 1 semester of remediation with extra support. So anybody who's anywhere near the San Diego area should go there. Like, just straight up.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's sort of about trying to figure out, yeah, but you can take a course someplace and then transfer it over, is my understanding, and savvy students do that.
All right.
Yeah, the only caveat is that oftentimes you have to reassess with their placement tests again. So just know that may be a step you have to take if it's particularly around prerequisites and remedial courses. So you also should really look, I think Katie kind of alluded to this, that on any of the college websites for terms like prerequisite challenge and other things in the assessment process that might give options to students to be able to have these kinds of conversations. So just maybe research that a little bit.
All right. Well, thank you so much to all of you for your wonderful information. This is really helpful for everyone who works with foster youth to be able to help advocate on their behalf and with them and help them advocate for themselves. So thanks for sharing. And thanks, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We are going to end here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.